Welcome to the D6 Family Ministry Podcast, a place where ideas, principles, and personalities come together to give you a ministry advantage that empowers the church and home.
I don't know anything more important in our society or in the kingdom of God than to help the church, help the family.
Discipleship is not an event, it's a way of life.
And one day it just hit me that discipleship at home was not about doing more. It was about inviting Christ into what we were already doing.
The goal of family ministry is not families sitting on the couch holding hands and singing Kumbaya. The ultimate goal is families that love God, love people, and make disciples of all peoples.
So that's why you're here. You're here to say 1 hour a week, as significant and as awesome as it is, we know that it's not enough and we want to be intentional with every hour.
You're listening to the D6 Podcast. Here are your hosts, Marianne Howard, Ron Hunter, and Josh Wooten.
I'm so excited about our guest today. He's a professor, author, also an introvert, but a great connector and communicator in regards to connecting with kids and turning everyday conversations into God conversations. It is Tony Myles. And one of the things I loved about his talk in this podcast and this interview is how he talks about turning weird conversations into God conversations. And we'll get in that later. But, I know connecting with my teenagers can sometimes be a challenge, but we developed this little game we play at dinner every night to be able to connect and find out what's going on in their world on a surface level, which most of the time can lead into those deeper, richer conversations and those things of God. But we play either mad, sad, glad, or high, low. And what we do is everybody goes around the dinner table sharing one thing that made him mad that day, one thing that made him sad, and one thing that made him glad, or the high point and the low point. We often tell them, you don't have to have a sad or you don't have to have a low, but you at least have to have a glad or a high point where you can point to where you saw God do something good in your life that day. What about you guys?
I actually stole some connecting ideas from you two guys, and we've implemented them into our rhythms. First and foremost, Ron, you leverage shoulder-to-shoulder conversations in the car. And that was just some really wise. I remember when I first met you and you really were talking through how that changed you and Lauren's relationship in particular in remarkable ways due to the season she was walking in. And so I've really practiced that with both my children. When we're shoulder to shoulder, I'm intentional about open-ended questions, heart questions, and just fun, random questions. Second, I stole from you and Lena, Josh, us four and no more, because we have four. And we have our Fridays, us four and no more. And that is basically kind of a rule where we say it's an us four and no more, which means they don't get to have their friends. We don't get to invite other people. It's just our family pressing in. We usually order takeout. It's kind of weird that it's turned into that. We order takeout and we do something together as a family, just us four, and just be intentional about connecting. No devices, just connection, eye contact, body language, all those things. We're connecting us four and no more. So those are two things that I actually stole from you guys.
Well, being we've said all that, I don't have much to add. I totally agree with Josh. Pam and I early on used what we called the tennis ball game, which was tossing questions back and forth. And we played the high-low for years. And then Josh, I stole from you, mad, glad, sad. And certainly I think there's wisdom in the mad, glad, sad. And let me explain for our readers why that's better than high-low. High-low may or may not get you where you want to go, but mad, glad, sad actually uses emotions, which tends to be what guides the kids into reaction. So emotion precedes reaction. And if we want the action to be correct, we've got to be guided by the correct catalyst. Emotion's not always the best thing to do it, but truth is. And when we ask our kids about what made them sad or mad, then we can coach that moment from a biblical perspective, not a fleshly perspective. And so, Josh, I've always loved the wisdom of that aspect. And in fact, the Recalibrate book goes into great depth from some of the biblical and the scientific reasons why that works so well on conversations. So today we've got a guy who is insightful. Josh, you mentioned that he was an introvert. And I like to say this, that introverts' best friends are questions. It allows you to toss something out and then be quiet. And for those of us who are introverts, we love being quiet, tossing that out and letting other people speak. So with that, let me ask you, who's one of the best question askers you know?
That would probably be you, Ron, to be completely honest. As I look at my life, there's I can't remember who the author was or the person we were speaking of in this podcast, but they made the comment, would you rather be interesting or interested? And people would always want to spend more time with people that were interested in them and what was going on in their life than that were interesting and had a lot to share.
That's so true. And an interested person actually wants to relate, where an interesting person wants other people to see the spotlight on them. Mm-hmm. And it's a big, big difference there. Yes. Marianne, what about you?
My son, Xander, is also a really good question asker. It's really interesting. And he wants to know all kinds of things about you. He doesn't just want to know the things that he's interested in. So if you ever connect with my boy, maybe we need to have our children on sometime.
Oh, man.
Wouldn't that be awesome?
That would be so revealing in so many ways.
Maybe not. Never mind. So he asks really good questions and he genuinely cares. And so, yeah, it's actually interesting that we talk about that. I really, really value our guest today and his take on conversations and the way that he is so spirit-led in his conversations. So you guys, this is going to be a treat today. This is going to be a huge help to anyone, parent, volunteer, ministry leader, grandparent, wherever you are on the spectrum in life. Mr. Tony Myles is going to equip you and empower you. And you're going to walk away with some really practical tools today about having God conversations in everyday life. So let's listen to Tony Myles.
Tony Myles has served as lead pastor, staff pastor, and volunteer in ministry. These days, Tony and his bride Katie are parenting their kids through college, high school, and elementary school while making a dent for the kingdom as they go. He regularly serves as a national conference speaker, as an active author for multiple publishers, and invests into higher learning as an adjunct professor at Crown College. Tony, thanks for being here today.
Yeah, it's so good to be here. Thank you for the invite.
So with kids in college, high school, and elementary school, I've got to ask, when do you sleep?
It's very rare. My oldest son loves to have theological conversations at 4 a.m. And it's usually like, hey, Dad, you want to play Fortnite? Sure. And right at the end of it, he's like, I got a couple things I want to talk to you about. And sure, let's do it. It's just fine. It's great. My younger daughter, she inhabits the world of animals and play and all that stuff. She's 10. And then my son in between, he and I are just good buddies. We go to youth group on Wednesdays. He loves hanging out with me at the end of the night. So I try to just double dip, I guess, is to answer your question as much as I can.
Yeah, and I love that you mentioned that about the conversations with your son, because that's actually what we're talking about today. We're talking about turning everyday conversations into transformational conversations. And I know this is something that you're really good at. It's something I'm not good at, so I'm looking forward to learning from you today. I am a bit jealous because you are good at making conversations with people. And here in your breakout at the D6 conference, you talked about turning conversations about weird stuff into God stuff. So for those of us, I'm not saying me in particular, but yes, me, for those of us who aren't great at making conversation unless the questions are right here in front of us,
sure.
Can you share how you do that?
Yeah, so to be honest, I am also by nature an introvert. And over the years, I have just decided for the sake of the kingdom to push through it, to try to learn things. I think my first stab at making conversation was like a talk show host. I'd have a few questions, I'd think ahead about the person, and at the end I'd say, okay, I think we're out of time. Just kind of hit that wall. But what that did is it forced me to just, like one more question, just one more thing. And I started to learn some things over the years that I just have intuitively done and learned. And the language that I've adapted is actually a language that I borrowed from a friend of mine, Stephen Barr. He runs cast member church, which in Orlando, it basically serves all of the people that are at Disney World and people work behind the scenes. And he has these 3 steps, and I'm just going to use his language because he says it best. But the idea is that when you go to somebody, the first thing you want to do is express value. And as you express value, it's just basically saying, hey, tell me who you are, tell me what you think. And it could be as simple as, hey, tell me about your day and what you think about it. It could be a little bit more like, hey, that news headline, what do you think about that? And you're expressing value in who they are. You're hoping that as they share, they'll open up. People have something they want to talk about, and so you're kind of mining for whatever that is. And then the second step is that you build some kind of trust. And you do that by taking about a third of the time that they talk to you, and you talk about yourself. And you say, hey, that reminds me of an experience, or that reminds me of something I'm processing, or here's a thought that I'm wrestling with. Can I just share that with you? And you definitely got to go a lot shorter because they are the focus. They're the goal right there. And then the third thing you do is you offer hope. And this could be at the end, a 30-second tag. It could be you actually talk about Jesus. It could be a scripture verse. It could be, hey, that reminds me of a nugget that I'm really processing. Can I share this with you? And that's where the conversation goes. Now, where it goes from there is 3 places. It's either more or less or maybe something else. And I think you'll find out if people want to talk more. You'll find out if they're shutting the conversation down. Or you'll find out if they want to go in a new direction. And that's where the second conversation goes.
This may be a little bit weird, but can we kind of like role play what that might look like, just to so I can kind of get a good grasp on what this is?
Yeah. So pick a topic, like anything in the world, anything in your life. You can bring the conversation up, or you want me to start it?
Sports. Does that work?
Yeah, that sounds good.
Okay.
So tell me about one of your favorite sports teams right now. Like who you just love watching?
I'm a big St. Louis Cardinals fan. I think they're actually playing like right now as we're talking.
Okay.
Early in the season. So yeah, it's love baseball. Yeah.
All right. Now I know as a guy I'm supposed to know a lot about St. Louis Cardinals. I just don't. I'm not big on sports. So can you just give me like the 60-second version of what would a dummy like me need to know about the St. Louis Cardinals?
Well, I'll give you the 60-hour version.
Okay.
Let's see. Coming off a semi-rough year, but the trade for Nolan Arenado is looking pretty good. So I think they need some pitching this year. Probably a middle-of-the-pack team. They don't quite have the hitting that they need. Bullpen looks pretty decent.
Yeah.
But I don't feel like they are where they need to be yet. They're not one of the top-tier teams.
How long have you been a fan of the Cardinals?
My whole life. Born and raised in St. Louis, 36 years.
Okay,
Yeah.
So like for me, I grew up in Chicago, and I couldn't tell you anything that's happening on the Bears roster, but I know that I'm a fan. I just know by nature I'm a fan. I think it's just amazing how in those moments, like we grow up, somebody hands us something, and like it's just cool to be a part of a story bigger than ourselves. Like I don't know if you feel this way, but some days it just seems like I need something more than what's going on in my life. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And for me, I mean, I don't know if it's okay to share this, but like I was actually outside today, and I was driving. I was going to Disney Springs, and I thought, like, this is good. And then this song came on the radio, and it talks about what if your blessings came like through raindrops. And I just thought, man, there's been times in my life where it's just been hard. But today's a good day, and God is God over all those days. So for what it's worth, I don't know, man. Maybe this is gonna be a good season for your team. Maybe it won't, but I'm just glad that we're living in a bigger story. So. I don't know if that helps. That's riffing.
It did. And actually, you did that so naturally. For a second, I thought that you hadn't like started yet, and you were just kind of still natural conversation with me. I didn't realize we were like in that, and it took me a second. I'm like, oh wait, he's actually in the role play, but it sounds so natural for you in the way you were doing it.
Yeah.
It wasn't like one of those weird transitions sometimes you hear pastors make, and you're like, that didn't make any sense at all.
Yeah.
So yeah, that was. I'm still kind of processing that because I'm like, yeah, it did feel so natural to go into it where you had me engaged in the conversation. You didn't lose me, and I wasn't wanting just to run away.
Yeah. So that's something I learned. When my first mission trips I went on, I was just pumped with stories. I'm like, oh, I got to tell everybody about this trip. And I asked my leader, who was actually my youth ministry professor at the time, I said, how do I share like all of this stuff that we just experienced? He said, pick a 30-second version of what you want to share. And share it. And if they ask you more, then share a 60-second version. And if they want more, then give them a 2-minute version. And I think that's kind of formed how I look at conversations is, let me get in and get out. And if you want more, Well, let's hang out a little bit more. So you're kind of fishy. You're kind of trying to see how long does this conversation need to go. And that way people feel like their time has been honored. So, yeah.
Yeah. Now, sometimes when people start bringing up God in a conversation, it can get awkward or uncomfortable. How do you keep students engaged when you feel like they're starting to get a little uncomfortable or a little uneasy with where the conversation is going?
I think it's a lot of it's just body language. I had a mom who caught me after our church services this last weekend, and she was talking to me about her son in front of her son. And her son is literally on the wall, like trying to squirm away because she's telling me about all the hard things he's going through and how he needs to set up an appointment with me. And I'm like, can you not see what's going on here, right? But her heart is huge. Her heart is big. And so from my perspective, I just kept nodding, and I'd look at him and I'd say, hey, man, like, I hope your week is going to be a whole lot better. I know right now your mom's just sharing some stuff with me. We'll get together, just to keep it short. There are other times, though, where I think you need to invert the conversation, where you talk about God by talking about what's wrong in the world. So let me ask you a question. So as you think about the world and the state it's in, give me like 3 or 4 words you would use to describe it. How would you describe the world?
Broken, violent, sinful. I know we're going spiritual there.
Yeah.
Beautiful at the same time.
Yeah. Okay. So that's great. So I think one of the things that we forget to do is go to the deeper story. And when we think about the world, and so I would just say, to answer your question, I'd say to somebody, hey, like, how's your week going? And if they're ready to talk about good stuff, great. If they're not ready to talk about God stuff, then I'm like, hey, tell me about the brokenness. Tell me about why this week was hard. And then you kind of hang out with them there, and you try to figure out, how do I take where you're at and show you something deeper? I believe that the world is still normal. This is kind of some phrases that I use. I believe that there's what's common and there's what's normal. What's normal is what God originally made. And we misuse the word normal all the time. We talk about a new normal. We talk about the normal of how our circumstances are. And normal is how God made things to be. But the problem is that normal is just shrouded by all the abnormal right now. And so when we talk about brokenness, we know it's broken because Ecclesiastes tells us that God has woven eternity into our hearts. And so the only reason we know it's broken is because we somehow inherently know that it shouldn't be that way. It's like when you go to a funeral and you're like, this is just wrong. Intuitively, spiritually, you know that our lives shouldn't be ending, but they do. And so sometimes for me, it's really about trying to figure out where is the normal nugget in the midst of all the abnormal. I had a student who recently found out that he is basically going to have a disease the rest of his life. And he was just crushed by that. And his parents told me about it. And I said, is this something I can share with a couple people? They're like, no, he's really embarrassed. So I did text him because he knew that I knew. I texted him and I said, hey, man, talk to your mom and dad today. And I just want you to know whatever you're going through is your story. And I'm not going to share it, but just know that if you want some safe people to talk to, I'd love to be one of them. And he wrote back, he's like, hey, thanks. I really appreciate that. And I said, and by the way, I know this feels like everything right now. But it's not, and you know that. You know that it's something. You know that Jesus is everything. And if you need some help remembering that, or if you just want to vent, here I am. So I think that's where you dribble it in.
That's really good. Now, do we need to have any type of barometer, or should we have a barometer to judge whether a conversation is successful or not, or is just the fact that we're trying a sign of success?
Yeah, and I think the simplest way to put it is, I know when I am being 100% faithful to what God has asked me to do. I know when I'm being 90% faithful. I know when I'm being 50% faithful, which, theologically isn't faithfulness.
Right, yeah.
But I think if I've done everything that I need to do, then I trust that God's going to use it. I'll give you an example of a time I failed. I was at a dinner with a family who, husband and wife, attended our church for a long time. My church I pastored in Ohio. And they had gotten kind of disconnected once they had a kid, and the kid was just colicky, and they were at home by themselves, no community, no input. And I started to hear that they were drifting spiritually. So we went out to eat with them, and my wife and I were just talking. And the moment I sat down, I knew the Lord wanted me to say, hey, just so you know, God still loves you very much. But it sounded so cheesy that I didn't say it. We got to the end of the conversation, and the wife said to me, I came into this with a prayer. I said, God, if you're out there, I just want you to say to me in this conversation that you love me. And I said, I blew it. I was supposed to say that. And I said that, but now it looked like I was just trying to win an argument. And ever since then, I've just decided I'm not going to not say what God wants me to say. But I got to do it in the way that he wants me to do it and not in the way that I want to. I'm not trying to win an argument. I'm trying to win a person. I'm trying to win them to the Lord. And I got to trust that he has other people in their life. If I don't seal the deal, somebody else is going to be a part of that process too.
That's good. That's going to give us a lot to think about with that. Now, I want to bring up a book that you and your son wrote, which I think that's really cool that you and your son wrote it together. It's called If, What If? And it features some quirky questions to kind of get people talking. I'm curious, have you noticed when it comes to these conversations, do people seem to respond better when you ask them questions rather than when you just share narrative?
Yeah, I think so, because the Bible is intimidating from the outside looking in. Once you get into it and you understand the larger story, it's a beautiful thing. And what I think is really cool about this, my son, when he was in middle school, would just start asking these questions around the dinner table. And we're like, these are really good. And then he'd ask follow-up questions. I'm like, who is this kid? Like, he's just so amazing at it. And so we started writing it down. And what we decided is we were going to pitch it to a couple publishing companies. And long story short, we ended up getting a really good bite from one that said, hey, we like it, but can you also write devotions to accompany the questions? And I thought, yeah, I guess I can do that. And then the more time I spent with it, I thought, I feel like God is calling me to do more. And so we created this book where you can actually learn the whole Bible in a year. And we took a long time, but with the acronym is that there is hope, THER. There is a Trinity. He gave us a heritage. An enemy came along. God started a revolution through covenants. Man's ego came around. Is, I-S. So God sent prophets to remind us of our identity. The S is the between the Old Testament and the New Testament. We spent a couple weeks on that. And then hope is H-O-P-E. Hero comes, Jesus, gives us an opportunity, shows us purpose, and gives us eternity at the end. So the idea is that I could teach that, but questions make you want to learn that. And so spending questions around the dinner table over the course of a year, we actually read it in 2 years because we don't do it every night. I'm just going to confess that. But along the way, we just really found that people respond best to inquiry, and why not give them the opportunity to create along the way? I think that's one of the things we forget in teaching is when we can put somebody in the position of becoming a creator, they own it exponentially, and a question allows that to happen.
Well, something I love that I've been hearing from you is your role in youth ministry and your role as a parent overlap. That they are one and the same, essentially. And I love hearing that. And kind of on the parent side of this, when these conversation opportunities come up, we often call them teachable moments in our homes. Sometimes, though, we don't recognize them until we've missed them. How can we make sure that we're taking advantage of the teachable moments that we're given in our homes?
I think part of the problem is we start our kids off with us in a place of authority and protection and diligence. And as they get older, that role has to change. And so we have to be willing to change with it. I'm just going to humbly share an example. My oldest son, who's 20, we learned that as he's driving, he's not always driving the speed limit. And sometimes he's changing his music on his phone, which, we're like, dude, you can't do that. And he bit his tongue when he tried to reply to me. And so in that moment, we're done with the conversation, but I said, hang on a second. Why are you biting your tongue? He goes, you want me to be honest? I said, yeah. He goes, you do it too. Now, I could have said, well, I'm a dad, and I said, you know what? I'm going to pray on that. And I came back like a half hour later. I said, all right, I'm in. Let's do this. He's like, well, I'm not saying I'm going to do it. I said, okay, I'm telling you that I am going to start driving better. I'm going to stop fully 100% at the stop sign, not 80%. And I detailed it out for him. And I've been catching up with him going, how are you doing on that? Here's how I'm doing. And so we have to put ourselves in the position of modeling what we want to see in them. But we have to be willing in those moments to just spend an extra 5-10 seconds and slow down and say, what's really going on here? What's going on beneath the surface?
Well, I appreciate this time that we've had. I appreciate your honesty in what you've shared and your vulnerability in these stories, and just really showing us not only what it means to and how to make good conversation, but I keep going back in my head to what you said about listening to what God has told us to do and being obedient to what he's asked us to do. And I think that plays such a vital role. And sometimes we get more worried about ourselves and how we're going to appear to others or being awkward, and we forget the God aspect of it. And so thank you for reminding us of that. Thank you for being here. And I thank you for what you've done for youth ministry and what you've done for parent ministry through the years. You've been an encouragement to me and so many of my friends, and just thank you for what you've done.
Thank you. I'm just going to hold up these books because I spent a lot of time on them, and they were for you. So If, What If, and Transform, I think they're amazing resources, but I'll leave it up to you.
Yeah, absolutely. Check those out. Thanks for being here, Tony.
Thank you. Yeah.
Hey everybody, it's your good friend Pastor Steve with the Elements Kids Worship team. Elements Kids Worship is a completely downloadable 52-week curriculum for use in your church with either midweek programming, kids church hour, or even with small groups. Through Elements, kids experience deeper growth and understanding of what it means to walk with Christ. This is accomplished by teaching firm biblical truths and emphasizing the need for kids to not only understand what the Bible says, but to apply it to their own personal lives. Elements Kids Worship is a valuable and economical tool for your church to use to impact kids with the elemental truths of God's Word. Oh, hey, one more thing. Be sure to head over to d6family.com to check out Elements Kids Worship for yourself.
All right. If you have listened to these incredibly creative approaches to connecting with your kids, then you probably have already pulled up Amazon or d6family.com and you're ordering his book, What If? Quirky Questions and Daily Devotions to Feed Your Family and Your Faith. Tony, you're brilliant. You are absolutely brilliant. And I think it's super cool to have co-written with your son. That must have been a fun journey, and that's going to create a lifelong connector. And if you will get into questions, it will do the same thing with your kiddos. Let me ask you guys, when you first started, Josh, you've been doing this a long time. Marianne, I know you're doing it a long time, but for a parent who just starts this, you mentioned in the intro, Josh, that when your kiddos invite their friends over, they stare at you like it's kind of a foreign area to ask questions. That's what's going to happen the first time parents begin to do this. So what advice do you have for parents who are going to begin asking such questions like Tony has advised us and like the high-low, mad, glad, sad game? When they ask it for the first time, what are the possible reactions their kids are going to have, and how do you help them get past it?
Sometimes they may be a little, hesitant to really give you the goods and say, why are you asking? Why are we talking about that? Why don't you just talk about, the football game or whatnot? And I usually just tell them hey, I care about you and I want to know what's going on in your life. And I want to know how to pray with you and help you out. Like, I just want to be here for you. Like, I'm not trying to pry or anything, but, it's just a way to find out what's going on in your world and not really try to let them know you're tricking them into anything, but just that you genuinely care about them. And I think once people know that you care, it's just like he was saying, when you go to someone, you express value in them going, hey, how was your day? Tell me about you. Because I found that most people, even if they're a little introverted, if they really genuinely feel somebody wants to hear about them, they're like, oh, well, yeah, I want to share about myself.
I think it's dangerous for us to ever assume that teenagers don't want to be heard or known or understood or seen. They want to be asked. Now, I know they're awkward. And the reason why they feel so taken when they're asked an intentional question, I think they're taken back because they don't feel seen. People don't ask them those questions. And so you getting to be that home that's communicating, I see you in my house. I see you and I want to know you. And I'm going to tell you, this man right here, Tony Myles, the words that are hanging on a Post-it note, because you guys know my thoughts on Post-it note truths, is take people where God is. Parents, let me just tell you this. There is no more important time than now. There's no greater time than now to start inviting God into the conversation. Teenagers are asking, your children are asking lots of questions right now about the world, about God, about their identity. And so I just think this is a timely message, and we have an opportunity to change the world and change trajectories by asking questions of those people that enter our home. We see them, we hear them, we listen to them, and we have the opportunity to ask questions. And that could, based on what he's saying, lead us and give us the opportunity to take people where God is. And so I loved what he had to say. I am so inspired, and I'm ready to go. I'm like, boys, get your friends here because mama's ready.
That's right. We value our kids when we ask them questions and then we actually listen to them.
That's right.
And it changes that relationship. Now, if you happen to have a child who is an introvert, and, Josh has given you some great advice to get over this, in this, he and Lena both navigated that well. Marianne is as well on this one. But occasionally you'll have a child who they really don't want to talk. They honestly, they're very comfortable in their own skin. They'd rather listen, and they will kind of clam up, and they'll give you as little as you will accept. And there's certain phrases that you can use to kind of help pull out a little bit more, and you got to model listening. But you can use the phrase, "Hey, tell me more. What did you mean by that?" And there are numbers of others. And the chapter I referred to earlier in Recalibrate actually has about 20 of those. I won't go through the whole list. But think about those kinds of phrases where you can draw more out of them because you want to hear it in their words, not your interpretation of it. And never assume you interpreted it the way they meant it. So that's the beauty of conversation in this. Tony, thank you for challenging us to take our kids where God is, to step into that moment, to be inquisitive, and to not make it about us, but to make it about those wonderful coaching moments, because when they start talking, then we can direct them accordingly. And that's our role as parents. So if you're listening, I'm going to challenge you to ask your kids at least 2 questions every day this week. At least 2. It could be the high-low. It could be the mad, glad, sad. It could be, hey, tell me about your day, whatever it is. But I want you to step into the moment and ask your kids questions and model listening. Show them how to listen. You can also teach them the tennis ball game. Any one of those will work. But consider doing it and see if you don't see a change in the relationship with your kiddos this week. So there's your assignment. 2 questions a day and listen. Next week, we've got a special guest. And in fact, we've got 2. We're going to have Marie Cook and Brianna Edwards, and they're going to be talking about special needs ministry in your church. This is constantly an increasing topic for our churches today as more and more people want solutions. Come listen, because both of them, mom and daughter, I'll give you a heads up now. Marie is the mom. Brianna is the daughter, and they got some great wisdom and insight from having been in this ministry for a number of years. Until then, remember your assignment. 2 questions and listen. We'll see you next week.
You've been listening to the D6 Podcast. You can learn more about D6 at d6family.com.